Okay, so I'm going to talk to all of you today about a program of research, or maybe an emerging program of research related to student-instructor rapport. I'll talk to you about the studies that I have done, the studies that we've got in the pipeline, and then also how I got to studying student-instructor rapport in the first place, because as you'll see, it wasn't my goal on the outset to examine student-instructor rapport. So we'll look at a little snippet of my research agenda, and then we'll talk more about rapport for the rest of today's little brown bag session. We'll talk about what rapport is. I'll tell you how I got to studying rapport, and then we'll talk about two studies that I've done so far, along with Matei on one of them. Talk about the findings of those studies, the outcomes of that research beyond just publications and presentations, and then also future directions for the research. So this is just a snippet of my research agenda. And as you can see over here on the left-hand side, most of my research activities are centered underneath this question of how does mobile technology affect learning and motivation? So by mobile technology, I mostly mean smartphones, laptops, tablets, those types of things. You can see that I've got two kind of separate strands here. First, we have the strand on note-taking. And so obviously I mentioned laptops. And so I have been examining laptop versus longhand note-taking methods. Then we also have this other strand that's student digital distraction. And by student digital distraction, I mean off-task use of mobile electronic devices for off-task purposes during class. And digital distraction isn't my term, it's taken from the literature. And I have two kind of strands underneath that umbrella. One of the strands, I just look at prevalence and prevention of student digital distraction. And the other strand, I'm looking at the consequences of student digital distraction, both for students and for the instructors. These are negative consequences of student digital distraction. And it was through looking at these consequences, particularly in a study that we were doing involving college instructors and how student digital distraction impacts them, that I came to notice that student digital distraction appears to be consequential for instructor perceptions of rapport and their views about how they react to student digital distraction creates some concern for souring student perceptions of rapport. So during today's presentation, or today's little workshop, we're going to look at this strand right here specifically, how we got from student digital distraction to student instructor rapport. So it all began with a research study that I conducted with my colleague Wayne Babchuk that was published back in 2020, titled Digital Distraction in the Classroom, Exploring Instructor Perceptions and Reactions. So in this study, we set out and asked the question of how do college instructors describe their perceptions of and their reactions to student digital distraction in the classroom. So we conducted semi-structured interviews with college instructors. These instructors were both graduate assistants and tenured track faculty. We used the phenomenological approach of identifying significant statements, focused in selective coding all the way down to theme generation and member checking, where we provided our findings with our participants to get their feedback on whether or not our findings accurately captured their lived experiences. And generally speaking, findings from these interviews reveal that these college instructors viewed student digital distraction as frequent and consequential in their classrooms. So these instructors were face-to-face instructors. They viewed student digital distraction as frequently occurring and as consequential for student learning and for student engagement. They also disagreed on their role in curbing student digital distraction. So they were about evenly split. Some instructors believed that it's not my job to keep students on task during class. If they've got their phone out and they want to distract themselves, then they can live with the consequences. But another camp of those participants said that, as the instructor, it's my job to protect the integrity of the learning environment. And so it's my job to try to curb student digital distraction or to prevent it from occurring as much as possible. For those instructors who felt like it was their responsibility to curb student digital distraction, there tended to be a reliance on proactive instructional strategies. So the desire to try to prevent distraction from occurring in the first place. So a lot of these instructors said that they've been trying to incorporate more active learning techniques into their instructional design, because if they keep the students active, then the belief was that they were less likely to become bored and turn to their devices in order to alleviate that boredom during class. And the belief in the benefits of those proactive instructional strategies was also grounded in this thought that calling students out can sour the relationship. So as the instructor, the way that I respond to off-task students has the potential to impact student perceptions of me. So if I call you out in front of all of your classmates, that's likely to embarrass you, and it could lead to you feeling negatively about me in the future. And so the way in which these instructors attempted to curb digital distraction was really kind of centered around this idea that the way that I address student digital distraction in the classroom can be consequential for the quality of student-instructor rapport. So if I see you on your phone and we've had a good relationship up until now, but then I call you out in front of everybody, perhaps that could change your perception of that relationship. If we just kind of have a lukewarm or, kind of an unhealthy or, not a weak rapport relationship, then that can make things even worse. All right. And so this was where I saw that connection between student digital distraction is more consequential than just their learning outcomes or just their engagement during class. This can also affect the student instructor rapport, which, as we're going to see here in a minute, can be a pretty potent ingredient for the kinds of things we want to see in the classroom: learning, motivation, engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I saw this link between student digital distraction and student instructor rapport. And it left me with this lingering question. So these instructors indicated that student digital distraction can alter their sense of rapport towards those students. So if I see you on your phone a lot, I might feel a little more negatively about our relationship. I might view you as being disrespectful in the classroom. They also believed that their reactions to student digital distraction could alter student perceptions of rapport towards them. So digital distraction prevention seems like it's one strategy that can be used by these instructors to protect the sense of rapport in their classes. So this left me with the lingering question of, in addition to digital distraction prevention, in what other ways do instructors protect or maintain the sense of rapport in their classes? So that's what got me kind of on the scent, if you will, to studying student-instructor rapport. So as we can see here, I went from studying the consequences of student digital distraction for students and instructors to now we're kind of extending that even further and looking specifically at student-instructor rapport. And so what is student-instructor rapport? Typically in the literature, you're going to find some kind of a definition surrounded around the student-instructor rapport is the sense of a mutual, caring, pro-social bond between students and their instructor. So from the student perspective, you're gonna like to think about it as it's the perception that your instructor is approachable, willing to communicate, cares about your success, and acts with your best interests in mind. So if you're a student who believes that this particular instructor is approachable, cares about your success, and acts in your best interests, then we can say that you've got a pretty strong sense of rapport towards that instructor. Rapport can be contextualized either as just a one-to-one relationship. So the sense of rapport that a particular student has towards you or that you have with a particular student, or in larger classes, enrollments of 50 some students. Some researchers also have contextualized rapport as that sense of relationship between the instructor and the class in general. So maybe you're teaching in a large lecture hall, can't possibly get to know all of the students one-on-one. So it's just kind of the general vibe that you're picking up from the students as a class as a whole while you teach them, and the kind of vibe that you're trying to give the whole class through your actions and words in front of them during class or in your communications with them outside of class. And the importance of student-instructor rapport is largely grounded within this affective learning model, which essentially proposes that favorable behaviors lead to favorable perceptions, and that rapport is seen to boost motivation, engagement, and learning. So favorable behaviors lead to favorable perceptions. These favorable perceptions are what I'm talking about related to student perceptions of rapport. And favorable behaviors are the things that instructors do to cultivate student senses of rapport towards them. And prior to the studies that I'm going to tell you about, it's kind of my view that the existing literature on student-instructor rapport was kind of loosely organized. It was mostly just looking at kind of piecemeal strategies. So if you send an email welcoming your students before the beginning of a semester, will that influence rapport? Or if you have a student-centered syllabus, will that lead to student-instructor rapport? Or if you use humor in the classroom throughout the semester, will that lead to student perceptions of rapport? And so it's just kind of loosely organized, if even organized at all, to seemingly just focusing on piecemeal individual strategies that instructors were using to cultivate student perceptions of rapport in the classroom. And so my research that I'm going to talk about today has largely tried to organize the strategies that instructors rely upon to the beginning of the semester. So what are the things that I can do at the beginning of the semester to initiate a sense of rapport? What are those strategies that I can use? And then what are the strategies that I use thereafter to maintain that sense of rapport across time? And are those strategies different or similar? Are rapport initiation strategies similar or different to rapport maintenance strategies in face-to-face classes or in online courses? And it's kind of an extension of this affective learning model. Reinhard Peckbrun's research on academic motivations is aligned with this, in that strong student perceptions of rapport can elicit those kinds of positive activating motivations or emotions that motivate students to participate in the learning process. So things like enjoyment, excitement, a sense of belongingness, all of those are those kinds of positive activating emotions that can bring students in. So in general, if students feel a stronger sense of rapport towards their instructor, they're more likely to engage in the learning process. And before I tell you about my own research, I should probably tell you about these 5 categories of rapport-related instructor behaviors. This research that I'm going to tell you about is kind of loosely organized around these 5 categories. So these are 5 categories that were kind of taxonomy built by Webb and Barrett in their 2014 study, where they surveyed college students about the kinds of instructor behaviors that elicit a sense of rapport from them. And then they took those student responses and organized them into these 5 categories. So first, we have attentive behavior, which is broadly defined as being attentive to student needs and eliciting and responding to feedback to be sure that you're being attentive to student needs. And so these are the kinds of examples of things instructors can do are sending prompt email replies, reaching out to struggling students, soliciting and responding student feedback. So trying to be as attentive as you can to student needs. There's courteous behaviors. So these are things like sending weekly email reminders, being reasonably flexible with course policies to show that you're trying to be fair and considerate towards your students. We've got a category of connecting behaviors, broadly defined as being personable and empathetic, humanizing yourself. So, not giving too personal self-disclosures to your students about yourself, about your interests, your motivations, your passion for the field, having informal chats with students before and after class, using humor in instruction, or memorizing and using student names, the kinds of things that we can do to build personable connections between ourselves and our students. We also have information sharing behaviors. So students have identified that they feel a stronger sense of rapport towards an instructor when those instructors have clear communication regarding course-related expectations. So things like organized course structure, providing students with a week-by-week course schedule, giving weekly reading guides or study guides. Students have reported that they feel like that shows that the instructor is more personally invested in the process when they engage in those kinds of behaviors, and so elicit a sense of rapport. And then common grounding behaviors. So finding similarities between you and your students, pointing out those similarities in an attempt to humanize yourself. So we've got those 5 categories, but again, just looking at those, we don't know if connecting behaviors are more consequential for rapport at the beginning of the semester as opposed to later on in the semester. We don't know if it's more useful to rely on courteous behaviors at the beginning or later on in the semester. So I launched these 2 studies about initiating and maintaining student-instructor rapport in face-to-face classes, which is the Flanigan et al. 2021 study that was published. And then we also have a study under review where we looked at online courses. And that's the study that I did with Nate and one of our undergraduate research assistants. So the method for both of these studies was pretty similar. The research question for both was largely, do college instructors use different strategies to initiate and to maintain student-instructor rapport in face-to-face classes or in online classes? So these were 2 different studies that looked at whether initiation and maintenance of rapport strategies were different, either in face-to-face or online classes. So we did semi-structured interviews with college instructors from using tenure track and non-tenure track faculty members as participants across both studies. And similar to the Flanigan and Babchuk study I described earlier, we used the phenomenological approach to conduct interviews and analyze the findings. And so I'll just show you the findings here across these 2 studies. First, we've got findings from the study on rapport in face-to-face classes. And as you can see here, of the 5 categories that I talked to you about already, only 3 were seen as consequential for the initiation of rapport in face-to-face classes by these participants: connecting behaviors, common grounding behaviors, and information sharing behaviors. Something else that's new, as far as I know, to the literature is this notion of baked-in rapport. These instructors described how students' pre-existing perceptions of you kind of help them come into the class with a pre-established sense of rapport, either for better or for worse. So if they've had a friend who took your class previously and had good things to say about you, then that student might come into the class with, an already pre-existing sense of rapport towards you. They already feel good about how approachable and how concerned you are for their success. And these instructors also talked about how important it is that class size, it's just smaller to cultivate interpersonal relationships in courses with smaller class sizes. And then they also talked about the importance of cultivating student-to-student rapport, usually through group work, to help the students feel comfortable with their surroundings and more receptive to your rapport building overtures. So these are the strategies that these instructors rely on at the beginning of the semester to initiate rapport. And we can see that wholly different strategies are used to maintain rapport by these instructors. So now is when those attentive and those courteous behaviors are seen as necessary for rapport maintenance, but they weren't identified as useful for rapport initiation. We see that connecting behaviors, at least by the perspectives of these instructors, remain important throughout the semester. So you want to humanize yourself and make personable connections, and then continue to act in ways so those connections don't weaken over time. They also talked about the importance of providing personalized instructions. That way you can continue to show the students across time that you're invested in their success by doing things like incorporating what you know about their goals or their interests into your instruction. Then at the bottom here, we can see where the connection to digital distraction again emerges. This category of having tactful responses to delicate situations. And so again, just like the study that I told you about earlier, these instructors also mentioned that the ways in which they respond to student misbehaviors can influence student-instructor rapport. And so they were mindful about behaving in such a way as to not deteriorate the quality of student-instructor rapport. And so in these face-to-face instructors, we can see that of those 5 categories of rapport-related behaviors, only connecting behaviors cut across both the beginning and the remaining duration of this semester. For the other 4, we had common grounding and information sharing as being relied upon more at the beginning of a semester, and being attentive and courteous more relied upon throughout the semester to maintain rapport. So those were for those interviews with face-to-face instructors of face-to-face classes. We'll see a lot of similarities here with our findings based on our interviews with online instructors. Again, we see the connecting behaviors, information sharing behaviors, and common grounding behaviors, in addition to class size, were identified by online instructors as being useful for the initiation of rapport. And as we look back, we can see that all 4 of these things were identified by those instructors of face-to-face courses as being consequential for helping cultivate a positive sense of rapport from your students at the beginning of the semester. And similarly, we also see that attentive behaviors, courteous behaviors, and providing personalized instruction were also identified by online instructors as being the most useful for maintaining rapport across time. So the findings from these 2 studies that are unique to the literature are first, these are the first 2 studies that I know that have shown that instructors deliberately apply rapport initiating and rapport maintaining strategies in either their face-to-face or their online classes. So as I mentioned at the beginning, originally the rapport literature was just kind of loosely organized around different piecemeal strategies that instructors can use. And then we had Webb and Barrett's taxonomy. These 2 studies have taken that taxonomy essentially a step further and organized them into the kinds of behaviors that instructors can use either at the beginning or throughout the semester to initiate or maintain rapport. So for me, as an instructor, a strategy is really only so helpful as if I know when to apply it, right? So when can I use this technique to get the outcome that I'm hoping for? We also saw that online and face-to-face instructors rely on many of the same strategies. Rapport initiation tends to be driven by connecting, information sharing, and common grounding behaviors, while attentive and courteous behaviors and personalized instruction are seen as consequential for rapport maintenance, not initiation. And so despite online instructors reporting greater difficulty establishing rapport with students than those face-to-face instructors, it seems that many of the same rapport relevant behaviors are applied across these 2 teaching modalities. So those are the findings from the research. And in the outcome of this research, in addition to publications, which are great, I've also been able to design and deliver workshops through our Center for Teaching Excellence for Georgia Southern faculty to help improve the quality of rapport in their face-to-face and in their online courses. I'm also scheduled to deliver similar workshops at other universities, including Auburn, Nebraska, and Arizona State. We've also designed online training modules that are self-paced for Georgia Southern faculty to enroll in through the Center for Teaching Excellence. So if those sound interesting to you, those are available to you now to enroll in and look through. And we were also awarded a seed grant, Mate and I, along with our undergraduate research assistant, Emily Ray, to fund the future research directions, where we're going to look at further refinement of what we've done so far to see if we can identify more unique components or areas that contribute to student perceptions of instructor rapport in online or in face-to-face courses. So for example, based on our own findings in online courses, we'd predict that the following components would be seen by students as consequential in online courses for rapport. The amount of instructor social presence, the amount of relationship building that the instructor engages in, the course structure, and whatever else that we can find through those surveys and interviews. And then another ongoing study is how do instructors' digital distraction policies and prevention strategies affect student perceptions of rapport. So we know that instructors have communicated that they're worried about the ways in which they respond to digital distraction and how it can affect student perceptions of rapport. But we don't actually have any research that shows how warranted those concerns are or how students report responding to instructors' digital distraction policies and prevention strategies as it relates to their perceptions of rapport. So that is all that I've got as far as that presentation. So I hope that you enjoyed learning about my research so far. And if anybody has any questions, if anybody's interested in this research in the future or in those workshops or training modules, you can certainly feel free to reach out to me.